Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, assessing the biggest stories of the past 7 days and their ramifications for the next 7 with a panel of distinguished international correspondents around the globe. Our podcast version of the show, selected by millionpodcast.com in their top 100 best podcasts on current affairs. We are now in the world's best 25, so thank you for watching and listening. It's been a week of shape-shifting peace plans for Ukraine. This time last week, there was an apparent ultimatum for President Zelensky, a 28-point plan that critics claimed looked like it had been written on the back of a Russian fag packet. It was shared with President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, after seemingly being Google translated into English, then to the press, leaked, and then sent on to Ukraine's leader, who appeared at his weakest in the face of a domestic corruption scandal. After emergency talks in Switzerland involving European security officials, as well as US and Ukrainian delegations, a revived draft emerged, aka the Geneva pivot. No talk of Moscow being gifted seized territory or of banning Ukraine from NATO membership after another meeting between Russia and American officials in Abu Dhabi. And once President Trump had been briefed, his Thanksgiving deadline disappeared. He was no longer telling reporters that if Zelensky disagreed, he could fight his little heart out. So after the rush, the spin, the panic, is peace any closer?
But it would be impolite on my part to speak about any final versions, because there are none. Ukrainian troops must withdraw from the territories they hold.
It's been a week that's seen a military coup in Guinea-Bissau in the aftermath of elections, and before the expected result came in, borders, airspace briefly closed during the takeover, which has seen the downfall of President Embalo, who confirmed to us at France 24 by phone saying, "I've been deposed." He was reported to be under military arrest, now in exile in Senegal, while the opposition leader and presidential rival has claimed it's a fabricated mutiny, alleging the call itself was, quote, blatant proof of a ploy to prevent Embalo being ousted. There's no independent evidence of that, and the African Union has condemned the kidnap, while the military command has attributed the takeover to an ongoing destabilization plot.
The High Military Command for the Restoration of National Security and Public Order has decided to immediately depose the president, close all institutions of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau until further notice.
It's been a week that's seen a national emergency declared in Nigeria after a renewed wave of mass kidnappings of school children, the worst since the Chibok crisis of 2014, when Islamists kidnapped hundreds of girls at a boarding school in the northeast of the country. More than 400 children reported to have been abducted in the past week, including what appears to be the single biggest attack at St Mary's Catholic School in Niger State, where an armed group forced more than 300 students to walk miles into the surrounding forests on foot before dawn. 50 since said to have escaped. Well, the group is still identified, but reported to be a criminal gang, wanting a ransom payment for each child. And analysts describe bandits targeting children of all faith, but suggest the recent spike is down to the group attempting to extort money from the Nigerian government, already under diplomatic pressure from President Trump, threatening to halve US aid and send troops, quote, guns a blazing, to wipe out terrorists if the authorities don't get a grip.
We have not received any information from the authorities. They just told us to pray, and they will go and bring our children back to us.
And it's been a week of Punch and Judy politics in the UK as the Labour government and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, laid out her budget that reneged on explicit pledges not to raise taxes just a year ago. Briefings and leaks over the past weeks created a theatrical "oh no she won't, oh yes she did" moment. She raised taxes by nearly £26 billion, increasing spending on the welfare state, putting Britain's finances on a firmer footing, she said. It pleased their party faithful, but cue its behind you moment. Conservative opposition leader Kemi Badenoch, in a relentlessly critical and scathing reply, claimed that it sent the country back to the 70s.
Growth down, investment down, business confidence down, the credibility of the Chancellor, and not just down, through the floor.
And in Hong Kong this week, at least 128 people killed in a block of high-rise apartments in the deadliest fire in 7 decades. And in Washington, D.C., an Afghan suspect arrested for shooting 2 National Guardsmen in D.C. 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom killed in the attack. The second, Andrew Wolf, remains in a critical condition. In a Thanksgiving message on Thursday, President Trump said, "I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries." It's time to meet the panel. Tonight we have independent journalist and consultant Anne Bagger-Marie. Great to have you back on the programme, Anne. Former editor, senior editor of the International Herald Tribune, the New York Times style magazine as well. She writes for Inspirel Publications, and which highlights women's stories in France. And it is with that in mind, I asked you about this story in Italy this week, legally recognising Parliament voted for femicide as a crime. It's not without controversy.
No, it's not, because what's interesting about what Italy did is, I mean, the law can be a very blunt instrument. It can also be a very sharp instrument. What the government of Giorgia Meloni, and I don't think it's any coincidence that it was a female leader of the country under whom this is happening, what they've done is essentially highlight the fact that not enough attention has been paid to this particular brand of violence against women. There are all kinds of ways to categorize murder, rape, other kinds of violence against women, but actually giving it a name and giving it its own status in the law is the kind of thing that a government does when it wants to show that it's serious about it, and it is serious about it going forward. You know, France did the same thing a couple of years ago. 2024 it was, with climate litigation. This is a civil court, not a criminal court, but it created a special chamber of the Paris Court of Appeal to hear climate litigation. And what it tends to do in a country is to, again, show that the country's serious, and also create a structure in which the lawyers, the judges, the consultants, anybody involved in this kind of litigation or this kind of prosecution of a crime becomes more specialized, more proficient, sharper at what they're doing. And therefore, justice is meted out more quickly. So what Meloni's doing in Italy, I think, is being noticed in France. This week, the government the justice minister received a report saying that something very similar ought to be done here, that a special chamber of the criminal court ought to be devoted to, and special magistrates ought to be devoted to crimes against women. So there were protests on Tuesday, women taking note of the fact that another week went by with more violence against women, and when is this going to end? I think it's going to be a very interesting 2026 for this kind of attention being paid to the specific form of crime.
And your analysis, your context is always welcome, as it is tonight, as it is every programme. Let's also bring in our other guest tonight, Matthias Krupa, Paris correspondent for Germany's Die Zeit. Great to have you back with us, Matthias. Stints in Brussels, Hamburg, I believe, before that. Let me ask you about a significant week they call Breadgate, or am I calling it that? This is a controversy about Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor in Germany, over blunt messaging.
Yes, he has quite a talent to do some remarks which open the door for, let's say, misunderstanding, confusion, or whatever you might call it. Here it was after his return from Africa. He was in Africa, in South Africa, for the G20 summit, and after that in Luanda for the meeting of European leaders with African leaders. And he came back. He did a visit in Hamburg. He was at a bakery, and to flatter the baker, he said, I was in Africa, or I was in Luanda, and in the morning room, I was looking for good bread. I didn't find any good bread there. So it was to flatter the German baker, but of course, it was not very kind or not very polite.
Did he say there's nothing like German bread? Was that the kind of point as well, or was he?
Yeah, there's nothing. Yes. He said there's nothing like German. You don't find there anything like German bread. I mean, Germany is very proud of its bread, so he's not alone with this. But of course, it has sparked a debate. I would say not too serious.
On cultural appropriateness, perhaps, versus the bluntness of just being frank, as Friedrich Merz is known for.
Exactly. That's what he claims to be.
Matthias, great to have you with us as well. Let's also join Constant Modes, the New York Times reporter, normally based in Kyiv, here in Paris for the moment. Great to have you with us as well. You covering the Ukraine conflict constantly. I do want to ask you, and I should say as well, you're part of the New York Times team that was awarded one of the most acclaimed prizes in American journalism, the Hillman Prize for newspaper journalism for Ransom, the Root of Haiti's Misery. So congratulations for that in 2023. Let me ask about a brilliant article that you've done in the past few days. This is about a non-fiction writer, Emmanuel Carrère, who basically he's been shortlisted for a literary award, and it's about his love for Russia, and it's kind of heartbreaking, and you kind of reflect how there's an odd French fascination as well with Russia. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Carrère is one of France's most famous writers, and part of his fame is really built on his books on Russia, right? He wrote 3 books on Russia. He's also the son of one of France's most famous historians on Russia, Hélène Carrère d'Ancos. She passed away a couple of years ago. And I was really intrigued by this writer and how he basically reacted to the war in Russia. He had written a couple of articles in magazines and newspapers about how he was shocked by what happened, by the invasion of Ukraine. And so for the past 2 years, basically, I was messaging him, asking him for an interview, because I really wanted to know about his opinion on the war and how that may have questioned his own beliefs about the country he loved so much, which is Russia. So I finally got to have a sit-down interview with him a couple of months ago, and it was fascinating because what he was telling me is that the war in Ukraine has forced him to question everything he believed in about Russia. First of all, his love for the literature, for the culture of Russia, but also why he did not pay more attention to Ukraine in the past, right? One of his most famous books is a biography of a radical far-right activist, politician and writer. His name is Limonov. And Limonov was born in Kharkiv, which is an eastern city in Ukraine, and yet Carrère, when he wrote the biography, never went to Kharkiv. He reported that book out of Russia, right? So in a sense, it's very telling about how blind he was, and he acknowledges that as well, about the Ukrainian roots of this writer and why Ukraine matters. And so since the war broke out, he's been to Ukraine 4 times. He's reassessed his view on Russia. He doesn't know whether he wants to write about Russia again. He's sort of lost, that passion for that country, and as he says, I'm quoting him here, he's looking for new roots, right? And Ukraine might be one of those new roots for him.
What is fascinating, I reported from Kyiv at the time of the Little Green Men before for Crimea at the time of the annexation, and you put on Russian TV channels, and it's hour by hour, just relentless, kind of soft power propaganda. I know you studied in Moscow. You do, and going back to Emmanuel Carrère's comments, you get a very different kind of information feed in your brain.
Yeah, it's just, if you essentially only read about Russia, listen Russian news and spend a lot of time there, your view of the war in Ukraine is absolutely different, right? This is a view that is shaped by the Kremlin's propaganda, that is, Ukraine has always and will always be part of Russia. Crimea was given to Ukraine in the 1950s, but in reality, it belongs to Russia. And some of the, I would say, main elements of the Russian propaganda is that Ukraine is ruled by neo-Nazi people, even though the president of Ukraine is himself Jewish, right? So years of that have obviously, shaped an opinion in Russia that is for us in Western Europe very difficult sometimes to understand, but which in a sense is what makes the Kremlin even stronger when it comes to selling this war that has been extremely bloody for Russia to its own population, right? Because there's an argument there that makes this war perhaps legitimate in their eyes.
We will get to that shortly. Constant, great to have you with us as well. Let's go to Rio de Janeiro. Let's complete the lineup. Bring in the broadcaster, columnist, writer and podcaster, Tim Vickery. Evening to you, Tim. Joining us tonight for a significant week for the former Brazil president, Jair Bolsonaro, who was convicted in September, remember, plotting an attempted coup, sentenced to 27 years. He'd been under house arrest. But then this week, there's been this odd self-sabotage and something to do with a soldering iron. What's going on?
Indeed, yet first, if I could just riff off the words of Kemi Badenoch there, complaining about going back to the 70s. Take me back. I've got happy memories. It's a decade where my family made extraordinary economic progress. First fridge, first TV, first washing machine. You don't forget these conquests, all based on council housing and cheap rents. So if there's a ticket back to the 70s, I'm on board.
Take me on it. Yes, it's a rosy period.
Indeed.
Take it away, Tim.
It certainly was for me and my family and many people who grew up around me. I can't understand why it's so bad-mouthed. Yes, it has been an extraordinary week, with maybe Christmas coming early for the Supreme Court in Brazil, because the battle was going to be, can former President Bolsonaro, can he win? This was the big objective of his lawyers. Can he win a status of staying under house arrest? And he's managed to sabotage that one with a soldiering iron. And after, maybe he hadn't read the instructions properly, he put it in his ear and it's affected his brain, because it's an extraordinary act of self-sabotage, because that victory, the best that he could hope for at this particular time, that of staying under house arrest, is now absolutely unviable after he has apparently tried to take off his electronic ankle bracelet. So it's an extraordinary act of self-sabotage. It's one that almost ensures that in the short term he cannot stay under house arrest. And the so-called tough man, the Trump of the tropics, now, according to his own sons, is much more of a whimpering wreck.
Yeah, he said it was an undue amount of medication, didn't he, that forced him to mess around with his ankle tag and try to solder it off. Tim, there is a plaque somewhere apparently awarded by Brazilian journalist to you, a master of journalism. Legendinho is the title for your work in Latin American football culture. So, Legendinho, we are days away from the World Cup draw. 9 teams from your region. You must get asked this all the time. Who is your money on?
Yeah, that just goes to show that you can fool some of the people all of the time, doesn't it, if I win awards like that? I'm sorry to give such a dull reply, but it's Brazil and Argentina. And Brazil now under the first real full-time foreign coach, Carlo Ancelotti. They seem to have some of their mojo back. And Argentina, everything has gone very well for them since winning the World Cup, although no one has ever retained the World Cup outside their own home continent. So if Argentina do it next year, they will have made history.
Tim, I thought you were going to say Haiti. OK, never mind. We'll hear from you all next week when that starts. Great to have you with us too. OK, to Tuesday night, 10 to 9 here in Paris, 10 to midday in Washington, D.C. Bloomberg published an article that cast a new light on the Ukraine conflict. The headline read, Witkoff advised Russia on how to pitch the Ukraine plan to Trump. When we look at it, well, it was a recorded, leaked transcript of a phone call between President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and President Putin's top foreign policy aide, Yuri Ushakov, from October the 14th, with Witkoff offering guidance to Mr. Ushakov, telling him he's come up with the 20-point peace plan for Gaza. He's thinking of the same for Russia and Ukraine. Hear me out, he says. Maybe Putin says to President Trump, Steve and Yuri discussed a very similar 20-point peace plan, and we're open to these sorts of things. Now, this leak offers the first real insight into what really appears to be going on behind the scenes as Ukraine and European allies scrambled this week for a response to a 28-point peace plan with favourable terms for Moscow, which was rapidly redrafted by European security officials meeting in Geneva to form a counter-proposal, removing the most pro-Russian elements and giving no territorial claims, keeping a path open to NATO as well. Now, reporters asked President Trump what he made of behind-the-scenes briefings of Witkoff.
Have you heard this audio that Bloomberg has of Witkoff coaching the Russians on how to appeal to you?
Well, I haven't heard it, no, but that's a standard thing, because he's going to sell this to Ukraine. He's going to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does. You got to say, look, they want this. You got to convince them with this. That's a very standard form of negotiation.
Well, a second leak involving Witkoff, who is due to meet President Putin in Moscow in the coming days, shows that he reportedly drafted the original 28-point plan in Miami with another Putin aide called Kirill Dmitriev, which Ukrainian critics have since called the dimwit plan. Meanwhile, there's no let-up in Russian bombardment of Ukrainian cities, and the news breaking today about corruption scandal that's engulfing the heart of government in Ukraine. Let's start with Constant. Let's get your assessment of this week, particularly with the latest on the corruption scandal.
So, Andrew Yermak used to be the chief of staff for President Zelensky for the past 5 years. And during the war, he's become this central figure in essentially everything that Zelensky touches, especially the peace negotiations. So it's quite a shock, I think, to a lot of people that he's now been dismissed. To be fair, Yermak was in the hot seat for the past 2 weeks because of this corruption scandal. Brief reminder about what this corruption scandal is about. The nuclear giant in Ukraine, which is called Energoatom, the anti-corruption agencies have revealed that top officials in the nuclear giant embezzled about $100 million from some sort of a kickback scheme, basically, at the company. And some of those people that have been involved in one way or another in the scheme, or at least accused of knowing about the scheme, were the former justice minister, the former energy minister. Both of them have been dismissed. And obviously, it was such a huge scandal that a lot of people asked, well, how can this happen without the chief of staff knowing, what was happening in this huge company? So about a week ago, the lawmakers from Mr. Zelensky's party many of them asked that Yermak be dismissed. Zelensky refused. In fact, he confirmed Yermak in his position as chief of staff, and then he sent him to those various places to negotiate the peace deal with the Americans, which made the headlines in the past few days. And then this morning, those same anti-corruption agencies that revealed the kickback scheme in the nuclear giant searched the home of Yermak, and it really felt that this was it basically for Yermak, that he would be possibly dismissed. Still, now the question is, who's going to replace Yermak, right? Because he's been so essential for the past 5 years for Ukraine and for Zelensky, especially as the lead negotiator, that nobody really knows how you're going to replace him.
Listen to Constant, there's a few threads to put together here, and one of them is what a week for it to happen. And yet, if we rewind a week, it was the weakness of the perceived Ukrainian government, to which many analysts say Russia had leaked these documents to try to set the scene and maybe get Zelensky to compromise. Now we're in this extraordinary position that his chief of staff is about to go, and we're seeing the way it's coming out. This is an independent organisation, the anti-corruption body, which is putting out these Netflix-style sensational videos, dropping them, and apparently politicians don't even know what's coming next.
Yeah, watching this from a distance, it leads to a lot of questions, which I'd love to put to Constant sometime. Maybe you'd like to answer them here on the plateau. But I'm just wondering if Yermak hadn't become, because of the swirling corruption scandal and the focus finally landing on him, if he hadn't become something of an albatross, and so his resignation might have even been something that he negotiated with Zelensky. What makes me wonder, too, of course you wonder who's going to replace him, who's going to be Zelensky's right-hand man, who's going to drive the peace process forward. I'd be curious to know who are the candidates for that, because Yermak is a person of the past. Who's the person of the future?
I don't really know, to be honest. It's really hard. Look, the issue with Yermak is that he concentrated so much power that either Zelensky replaces him with somebody who would be involved in everything from peace negotiations to domestic policies to finding money to fund the war effort, or he sort of shares some of those responsibilities between different advisors, right? The role of the chief of staff originally is not really supposed to be to being basically the lead negotiator, right? But Yermak was initially the foreign policy advisor to Zelensky when he joined Zelensky in the presidential administration in 2019. Then he became the chief of staff in 2020. And as the war broke out, he just became, one of this very small team of advisors surrounding Zelensky. Yermak was one of those 3 or 5 people that slept in the headquarters of the presidential administration as the Russians were closing in on Kyiv. So in a sense, he also built this trust relationship with the president of Ukraine that not a lot of people have. But what was probably one of his advantages, one of his assets, became also one of his liabilities, because he became the sort of shock absorber for a lot of people. And nobody in Ukraine is today ready to sort of question the legitimacy of President Zelensky, or even that he knew about the corruption scandal. But who's else? Who's second in command in Ukraine? That's Yermak. And so he became the one that people focused on.
So there was this raid. Andrew Yermak said he's cooperating, that he's denied any involvement, and the authorities, there are no charges and no association on Andrew Yermak, and it might go to your point. We'll see how things play out. But Matthias, this is a field day right now that Russian bots must be having. They don't have to do the work out there. They can use this moment to amplify. I just wonder, in the midst of the frenetic diplomacy this week and this 28-point peace plan, in inverted quotes, apparently for Friedrich Merz, for President Macron, there was a real frenzied kind of panic moment of what to do. What's your take on what was going on behind the scenes?
It's difficult. I'm not behind the scenes, so it's always difficult to have
in front of the scenes.
In front of the scenes, as it looks like. I mean, in this Yermak issue, I think there is also a message for the Europeans, because to keep them on board, to have the support from the Europeans, to give the European leaders the chance to convince their constituencies to support the Ukraine, you have to prove that you take this corruption issue serious. So that's, I think there is also a message for abroad. And I mean, the whole week it was a how to say? I mean, what a week for diplomacy. I mean, finally, it has two. I think it has two messages for European leaders, if it was still necessary. The Americans, this administration, Trump, and the others are not playing on their side. So the Europeans have to do it on their own. They are alone now in all these attempts to negotiate around the Ukraine. And if another proof was necessary, it was this. And I mean, for the moment, but that's always in the Trump administration, it's always for the moment, you can't rely on it. They managed another time to water down this original plan, to get their interests heard, to make their points, to arrive at a new plan. But you have to be aware that with this administration, I mean the issue of the Svitkov tape, which was leaked. To me, the most striking issue in it was when Witkov advised his Russian counterpart before a visit of Zelensky in Washington. You have to say to your president he should phone Trump before Zelensky arrived, and he get what he and the Russians get what they want. The Americans didn't deliver the long-range missiles Zelensky was asking for. And I mean, this means it is not just confusion. It is not just not on their side. He, in this moment, was actively working against the interests of the Ukraine. And that means against the interests of the Europeans.
And the more information we get, the more we have to keep going back to analyse again. So this goes back to the October moments with this meeting between the two of them, transcript recorded, where he says perhaps Mr. Putin should have a conversation with Mr. Trump. This is a moment where President Zelensky was about to meet him, asking for, as you say, Tomahawk missiles, which wasn't granted. Now, we're left with lots of blanks over what happened next. But ultimately, there's an extraordinary article, Anne, from Anne Applebaum this week, questioning really about whose side Steve Witkoff is on, suggesting it's not on the side of the Ukrainians. She's not the only one.
Yeah, watching this take place and also just keying into that bit of Trump that you just played, this is what happens in negotiations. It becomes so clear that not only are Trump and Russia not playing in favor of Ukraine, they're not even playing the same game as Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is fighting for its very survival. It's playing old-fashioned diplomacy, or it's hoping for old-fashioned diplomacy to kick in and back certain values that Western democracies want to uphold. Trump and Putin are playing a business deal. And one thing I've learned in a long career in business journalism is that sometimes business deals may look like they have a moral side, but really they don't. It's about who wins, who loses, and how much money they end up with. So if you can say that Ukraine is disadvantaged in that kind of game because they don't play that kind of brinksmanship, fine. That really does put the onus on the Europeans, who are interested probably as much, if not more, than Ukraine on Ukraine's survival. It puts them in the position to try to have diplomacy kick in and beat what the transactional analysis is trying to do.
I believe it's one of Constance's colleagues, listening to what Anne was saying there, that coined the headline this week, "The Death of Diplomacy, the Rise of the Special Envoy." Very interesting. Tim, can I briefly ask your long view about this? As governments watch from afar these developments outside of Europe and the US, Brazil's President Lula maintains notably closer diplomatic links and political ties with Putin than he does with President Trump.
Yes, and Russia is an important trade partner for Brazil. We've had a fair few Brazilians go over to fight, far more for Ukraine than for Russia. Although there have been some on the Russian side as well. I think the key to this is that Ukraine have much more need for manpower and so have actively been recruiting. Most have already come back. Some won't be coming back. The Brazilian diplomatic service thinks that around 30 are either dead or disappeared. This got a lot of traction at the start because a decade or so ago, with the rise of the nationalist international, these causes these countries got on the radar screen for the Brazilian right. And there were many carrying Ukraine flags to demonstrations and Russian flags to demonstrations. We're in favor of Ukraine nationalism. We're in favor of Russian nationalism. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, one nationalism, other nationalism. and you can't simultaneously be on the side both of the fox and of the chicken. But Brazil, historically, its position has been of neutrality. It is, of course, a member of the BRICS together with Russia, and Russia is a far more important trading partner than Ukraine is.
Well, on that figure that you gave us on Brazilian fighters and soldiers, let's talk about Russia and Russia's soldiers. According to the Institute for the Study of War, there are an estimated, as of early this year, 620,000 Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. According to the ISW, Russia's total active force is 1.3 million. President Putin announced last year he's increasing that to 1.5 million by 2027. It's one of the central, frequently cited reasons many European governments and NATO members give for the current wave of rearmament and remilitarisation. The what if we're next concern is more pressing than at any time since the end of the Cold War. Now, last week, the new French head of the army, General Fabien Mandon, told a congress of mayors that France's biggest weakness in today's dangerous times was a lack of will to fight, and that it will be necessary to have the spirit to accept we will suffer to protect what we are. So to Thursday, at the military base in Grenoble in the Alps, President Macron announced a new voluntary military service programme aiming to build reserves nearly 3 decades on from the end of military conscription, which was once a staple of French life from the revolution of 1789 to the late 1990s.
This shift in threats has resulted in new decisions. We cannot return to times of conscription, but we do need mobilization. The country needs to be in a position to defend itself properly against whatever enemy, not against any specific enemy, but given particular threats.
It will be implemented as of next summer. Young men and women, 18 to 19, volunteering for 10 months of military training to be paid at least €800 a month. Over the border in Belgium, a similar move is afoot, and in the Netherlands too, with better pay, both governments offering €2,000 a month to new recruits. Germany considering similar plans. Constant, let's begin with you. This is quite unlike other French politics. There seems to be a unison in the decision, an agreement, and politically it's polling well as well amongst the population.
It is, yeah, even though we've also seen some reactions from the opposition, right, in the left and on the right, saying basically that President Macron is a warmonger and that he shouldn't try to scare the French population.
So they're not agreeing on the extremes, both on the right and the left. They don't think this is a good move?
I would say, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? Because whenever you talk about the defense issues, I'd say that on the right, they rather agree that they should strengthen the army, right? But I guess that the announcement by President Macron that was made just a few days after the top French army general said that we should agree that we should be prepared to basically lose our sons, just added some sort of a momentum and context to President Macron's announcement. And a lot of people saw that as a message basically being sent to the French people that perhaps at some point some of the French soldiers will be sent on the battlefield. Where exactly? Nobody knows. But I guess that sort of created some fear. That said, it's interesting to also see this announcement in the sort of with the lenses of what people in Eastern Europe think and do. If you go to countries such as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all of them have variations of a draft, and it's really accepted as such because one of the main reasons is that most of them share a border with Russia, but also because they understand that they face a threat that may be imminent. It is less the case for France, but still there's a threat that's growing. So I'd say that in a sense, Western Europe perhaps is a little bit lagging behind other countries in Europe that have taken stock of the Russian threat earlier. For obvious reasons, and France and Germany are just, in a sense, rushing to meet that threat properly.
It's a point that speaks of the moment, Constant, because the headline, take a look at this, and this was the Week magazine in the UK, saying this: is conscription the answer to Europe's security woes? It calls the Macron plan a timid step. So therefore the question is it sufficient to deal with the broader warnings of the threat from Russia?
Well, hasn't that been the question that Europe has really balked at confronting for, I would say, at least a decade, at least since Trump won, at least since the first Trump administration when he threatened to pull out of NATO? the question has always been, can Europe defend itself without the United States backing it up? And there are a lot of commentators on both sides who say, on both sides of the political spectrum, who say it's about time somebody lit a fire under us to figure out how we are going to be able to defend ourselves without Trump and without the U.S. and without NATO. Is it enough? It's probably not. And one of the reasons I would say that, not because I master the numbers or I'm a great military strategist, but I just listen to somebody like Emmanuel Macron saying, well, conscription's not the answer, and we do have a threat, but we're not going to say where it's coming from, but we really do need to get. Where's Churchill? Where is somebody pointing out to the French people that this is an existential crisis and you need to fight them on the beaches and you need to fight them in the streets and you will never surrender? Maybe we haven't arrived at that moment yet, but that's probably what's going to be necessary. And I think at this point, France hasn't resigned itself to that, and probably for very good reasons. Germany probably hasn't resigned itself to that. You have to take some steps in order to get the population ready to fall in behind you in this kind of a challenge. And this just isn't the moment.
There were echoes of it. The General Secretary of NATO, Mark Rutte, saying that if you want to speak Russia in future, then don't do anything about it. And to what Constance point before, the French military general saying as well, our sons, which was kind of misinterpreted by some, about physical children rather than soldiers of future generations, which is the seeming intent. And on the point of figures, this programme starting for the French, 3,000 participants in the summer next year, scaling to 50,000 by 2035. The active French military estimated around 200,000 right now. Germany and its government scratching its head right now, Matthias. It wants to be the biggest army in Europe, at least within the EU, by 2029, 260,000 troops. Talk to me about the discussions on the recruitment and how they're going to get there quickly.
Yeah, the discussion is very similar to the discussion, by all the differences in the army itself, but the discussion is very similar to the discussion here in France. This remark of the French general, which was quoted, it reminds me of a controversy we had in Germany some month ago, when the defense minister said Germany has to become kriegstüchtig, which means Germany has to become fit to war. And we had the same discussion. Does he want us to lead into a war? Does he want to lead our children into a war? Maybe a little bit because we have another history, because we have another understanding of our army, even a stronger discussion with us. But now the result is the same. The government, the coalition, agreed on a reintroduction of a military service, like in France. It should be in the first step a voluntary military service. The Germans, because they have the money, are paying are promising €2,600 gross to any voluntary.
No, it's better than Belgium.
That's better than Belgium
and France.
Yeah,
I know where I'm going.
That's maybe the advantage Germany still has. But that's the way they try to convince as many volunteers as possible. But they are aware, and that was already the discussion. If they don't arrive. Do we have to have a second step about about some kind of mandatory service? Mm-hmm. I think it's, of course, not an incident that, and you're absolutely right, that this is a debate which is in Western Europe much more present and much more necessary than maybe in Eastern European countries. Mm-hmm. And it's not an incident that we have this debate in a lot of Western European countries now.
Well, meanwhile, the Kremlin claims it is nonsense, propaganda, deliberate lies to detract from domestic failures. And the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas saying, actually, on the plan, it shouldn't be Ukraine reducing its soldiers. It should be Russia. She wants to see a commitment to reduce Russian troops. Well, to the US, Tuesday night aboard Air Force One with President Trump on his way from the White House, bound for Mar-a-Lago for the Thanksgiving holiday. He was asked about reports that Venezuela's autocratic leader, Nicolas Maduro, had reached out to the team wanting dialogue to try to de-escalate tensions as a build-up of US Navy, the biggest since the Cuban Missile Crisis, sits posturing in the Caribbean off the Venezuelan coast. President Trump said there were two options.
If we can save lives, if we can do things the easy way, that's fine. And if we have to do it the hard way, that's fine too.
Mr. President, do you have any reaction? If you carry on,
I'm not going to tell you what the goal is. You should probably know what the goal is, but they've caused a lot of problems.
Well, ostensibly, US forces are taking action against the drugs gangs of Venezuela, Tren de Aragua and Cartel de los Soles, the Aragua Train and Cartel of the Suns, are both now designated terrorist groups by the White House. The cartel proscribed this week, giving Washington additional powers to act forcefully. Well, it's already acted with airstrikes on alleged drug smuggling boats, killing more than 80 since August, as Caracas says is extrajudicial killings. Well, Venezuela also has the world's biggest proven oil reserves in the world, and its leader, Nicolas Maduro, widely seen as having stolen last year's election. Oh, and while we're waiting for a possible call with Trump, he's put out videos of himself dancing to remixed versions of his recent speech advocating peace while rallying for support for a people's war in case of attack. Tim, that was surreal. Where's this heading?
Hopefully, nowhere, I hope, because it seems to be very unpopular with the US public, the idea of military operations in Venezuela. You have learned colleagues there, much better placed to talk about this than I do. But even the UK government, the historical ally of the US, seems to doubt all of this stuff about major drug cartels and terrorist organizations. And I think if even the UK government are doubting that and not handing over intelligence to the US, that's a sign that it is a pretext for a grab of oil reserves. So hopefully this will go nowhere. I wonder how much this depends on the domestic context of US politics.
And one thing that strikes me as well is the CIA became explicit covert authorization to act. And President Trump saying in a Truth Social over the Thanksgiving period that he's not ruling out, and he's expecting, in fact, some kind of land force to take on the anti-drugs gangs. What's your take?
I'm now going to quote Michelle Goldberg, who's a wonderful columnist for the New York Times, my alma mater and where Constant works. She says, the fact that we can only really speculate about why the administration is menacing Venezuela underscores how weird the policy is. Okay, you've already mentioned doubts about whether Venezuela really is a nexus of the drug trade. There are some concrete doubts about that. The most cogent argument for why Trump seems to be so fixated on Venezuela seems to be a personal one, as it is so often with this president. I mean, Maduro is a strong man. You would think the two of them would have a lot to admire in each other, but Trump can't stand the guy. Maduro happens to be a strong man who mocks the United States and mocks Trump. It looks more and more as more information comes out. I mean, the oil reserves, I suppose it's possible that that's the ultimate goal, but he's going about it in a very, very strange way. I mean, ground troops don't secure oil reserves. Negotiation secures oil reserves. So is it possible that this is simply he doesn't like the guy and he doesn't like being mocked, and so he's going to show him a thing or two? It really boggles the mind as to what the end game is here. I have absolutely no answers.
I spoke a short while ago to somebody who has some insight. This is Douglas Farrer. He's a US investigative journalist. He consulted with the Pentagon in 2019, wargaming scenarios on overthrowing Maduro and what happened next. And he said in every scenario, Constant, it was chaos. You have loyalist ex-military splinters versus criminal drugs gangs. And I just wonder whether that actually will go into Trump's head. They're clearly wargaming this. What's your reading of events?
Not so sure. I'm not so sure that President Trump really considers those war games. By the way, if those war games were made, say, like 2 or 3 years ago, he'll say that they're just antiquated, right, and they no longer work. I do think that there's a lot of attention and focus on the oil reserves of Venezuela. I think it's interesting to remember that the Venezuelans themselves reached out to the Trump administration several months ago, essentially offering a deal on the oil reserves, similar to what the Americans had tried to do with the minerals deal in Ukraine, that is essentially share a significant share of the oil reserves of Venezuela in order to protect the regime and to reach some sort of an agreement. Now, why the Trump administration has turned down that offer, we don't really know. And why has President Trump decided that he would just like go on and pressure the Venezuelan government further is a little bit unclear. Maybe he thinks that he holds the upper end in this fight.
A brief thought, Mateus. I note this. There's a public letter by European political figures called No War in Venezuela. Amongst the signatures, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. On the left, Yanis Varoufakis in Greece. Manon Albury of the French hard left, Frantic Embalo. There's no big figures, European leaders on this list.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, they don't want to confront Trump on another field. I'm quite
He's too
sure.
useful on Ukraine, perhaps.
Yeah, they too useful, maybe not, but they need him on the Ukraine and they need him on other issues, so they avoid it. I mean, all this Venezuelan issue goes against Trump's presentation. He presents himself as a peacemaker, and he wants the Nobel Prize for Peace. So it doesn't make, like often in his policy, it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Mateus. Thank you, all of you, tonight, to the whole panel. Unique insights, on-the-ground experience, context and clarity, and ex-location verified this week. We will leave you with a viral moment of the week. This is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in a classic divert, surrounding yourself with children publicity. Seen to be trying to get in on a TikTok trend that's apparently going in viral in British and American classrooms. It's the 6-7 trend. I don't know if you've heard of it. And 6-7 has been made word of the year for 2025 by dictionary.com, apparently. Anyway, I'll leave it to you to decide if he's just added to or killed off the trend. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in not 6, but 7 days for the world next week.
Oh, it's not on the same page.
6-7. Yeah. 6-7. Everybody. 6-7. Are you doing page 6-7?
We're not over that yet. We're not over that. Still very much a thing.
See you later. That's a bit wild.
Stuff for that lovely 6-7. You know, children get into trouble today in mathematics school.
Oh, do they?
So,
right.
yeah, they're lovely children in year 2.
Yeah, there they are. Sorry about that.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's fine.
I didn't start it, miss.